Okay, so everyone basically knows by this point that YouTube has become a great home for new animation indie artists. So many new animators and artists all across YouTube and across the world have uploaded their own individual series and animations to YouTube to build their own audiences. And this, I think, is great. I really think that this is a phenomenal change to the industry and is something that should really be celebrated a lot more than it already is. Because of course, back in the days before the internet and YouTube, this sort of thing really wasn't possible at all. And really just about the only places that you could go to back in the day before YouTube and the internet to find new artists and animators would of course just have to be animation festivals. And of course, those were great in and of themselves, and they are something that still give a lot of new animators and artists a lot of great chances today in our own world. But really, when it comes to just the sheer amount of exposure and just the sheer amount of notoriety that someone can gain from something like YouTube today, it really isn't much of a comparison to put these two up against one another. And so yeah, that's really not what I'm here to do today. Instead, I just really want to talk about YouTube and the new artists and animators that can be found on YouTube today. Because of course, so many of these artists and animators are so great already, and they're so renowned for a lot of their really great work. Today, YouTube is something far different than the original video sharing site that it began as back in the early 2000s. It's really something that's grown to become a great home for so many different artists, so many different creators, and so many different animators. Everyone shares the same space and has the same chances to become just as great as anybody else. This has given so many different creators, artists, and animators so many different chances to work on and create different sorts of content. Today, YouTube is a great home for individual videos, individual animations, fan works, and so many different other types of content. Today, if you come to YouTube looking for something in particular, I really have no doubt that you'll end up finding something that you're looking for. No matter the genre, medium, or the type of creator involved, you will often end up finding something that you're looking for. And this is something that I think goes doubly for the animation industry and community here on YouTube. Today, with YouTube, animators have more than just a space to share their own individual works. Because of course, whilst they do have their own individual channels where they can share those individual works that they've created themselves, they also have the ability to build their own following with their subscribers. So many different animators today are getting their start here on YouTube. Whether it be fan animations, smaller animations, or specific sorts of animated content that individual people are looking for. All of this is coming together to make YouTube one of the hot spots for the animation community. So much so that individual articles were released recently that proved how YouTube was becoming one of the most popular places to find animated content. And that's not just for individual communities, or individual people, or generations. Instead, analysts found that YouTube was becoming a sort of place where anyone from any generation or any background could be found enjoying animated content. And this, I think, is fantastic. I love seeing that so many different animators out there are really finding their footing here on YouTube. And I really love that today, individual cultural stereotypes about cartoons being only for children are finally starting to be challenged by newer audiences. And really, I think that a good indicator of all this success can be found with individual channels like Spindle Horse, Meat Canyon, and Glitch Productions. Glitch Productions especially has managed to find a lot of success with their individual animated content. Their series like The Amazing Digital Circus and Murder Drones really have been enjoyed by large audiences of so many different types of person. And of course, all of this great success has been shared with the original creators of those shows like Liam Vickers and Gooseworks. And really, I just love to see that the individual creators and the production studio are sharing a lot of this success. And recently, I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about shows like Murder Drones, Hell of a Boss, and so many others. And it's got me wondering, with all the success that can be found on YouTube today, how good does an animated pilot for a series actually need to be? Because of course, back in the days before YouTube and the internet, this question used to be relatively simple to answer, as animated pilots back in the day weren't originally intended for massive audiences that could be found on YouTube. Instead, they were relatively simple productions and meant only for a selective group of people that could be found at a production company or channel. This meant that a lot of the ideas found in individual series and pilots could be wildly different from what actually ended up coming through with the original series. And really, I think a great example of what I'm talking about here has to be the pilot for Gravity Falls. Because of course, whilst the pilot for that series does follow the same sort of structure and foundation that can be found with the later series, there are a variety of different ideas found in that pilot that are drastically different from what actually ended up being delivered. And really, by looking at the pilot, I think that most people's takeaway from that viewing of it would have to be that it would just largely be an aesthetic difference between the two. Sure, some things look a little different, but the bones of the series are largely the same, except for one or two minor differences in the character writing that wouldn't be found in the later series. And this is something that I'm not critiquing, I'm not claiming it's bad or anything like that. It's just something that you notice. And really, looking back on it, it is fun to see how the creators experimented and refined a lot of their original ideas before bringing them into the series. But again, I've been thinking about this recently, and just how creators today are putting their own individual works out there for the world to enjoy. Because really, what a pilot is to me is something that you can experiment with. It's a rough outline for your series or your film. It's something that you can show to investors to get them excited for whatever you're trying to put together, and really find the footing and then just the eventual support to actually make that thing. And that's how it's been for the longest time, except for in recent years, as YouTube and the internet have really thrown a spanner into the works of the whole machine. Because today, animated pilots aren't something that you're sharing to just a small select group of people. Instead, they're now something that you share with your entire audience. It's now something you put out there and you hope your audience enjoys to see whether or not it can be truly successful. And two great examples of this, I think, have to be the Spindlehorse series, Helluva Boss, and of course, Hazbin Hotel. Vivian Medrano and Spindlehorse Animation are well renowned for a lot of their great work here on YouTube. Together they've created and released 2 indie animated series here on YouTube. And really, I think you can find the key to their success in 2 places. First has to be the animation community and audience that Vivian Medrano put together on her YouTube channel. After years of posting work online, Vivian Medrano managed to find a lot of success and build her own animation community and audience. This audience and community knew who Vivian was, what she was doing, and why they were supporting her. And of course, they were supporting her for the release of her individual animated series. But before those, she released her animated pilots. And sure, similar things like this had been done on YouTube before by other creators. But Vivian Medrano, I think, had to be the one who was the most successful, with her pilot for the Hazbin Hotel ranking in millions and millions of views, before eventually the show was picked up for an entire series run over on Amazon with A24. And this is something that I think really got the ball running for a lot of indie animation artists and animators to go out there and start making their own success on YouTube. It's also what I think set the bar for what should be expected with animated pilots today. In going back and looking at the pilot for Hazbin Hotel, you can see that there are a variety of differences between it and the eventual series that would follow. But still, the initial foundation of what the series is largely the same. In fact, a lot of things are largely the same. Individual ideas relating to characters, backgrounds, settings, all of these things are largely the same. And this goes doubly for the pilot for Helluva Boss. Sure, there are some minor differences in the aesthetic and production, but largely, the main idea of what these series are is largely the same. And this is something that is echoed through a lot of different animated content here on YouTube, with different pilots for different animated series being released here on YouTube, and series that eventually follow that aren't all that dissimilar from the original pilot that was released for them. And this has me wondering, how much room do you have for experimentation when releasing a pilot and then eventually creating a series here on YouTube? Do creators today have the same sort of room for experimentation that could be found with pilots like for Gravity Falls? Or do they have to stick largely to the initial ideas that they presented in their first pilot? And this is something that I go backward and forth on. Sure, audiences might be a little disappointed if they see a pilot for something and then see that a lot of the different character and setting and world building ideas in that series that eventually follow it is somewhat different from the initial pilot that preceded it. But still, I think having that room to actually experiment with those ideas that you're going to put into your eventual series is something that's really quite necessary, as well as something that should also just be basically enjoyed. It's something that's really one of the best parts of creating any sort of story. So yes, of course, creating a pilot on YouTube doesn't mean that you shouldn't stop experimenting with those ideas that you're going to put into your story. And largely, I think that audiences and creators know this on YouTube. However, what I think is also going on YouTube is that a lot of creators today are going into creating their initial pilots and series with a lot of their ideas already established. And that, again, I think it's fine. I think it's great. Vivian Medrano, for example, said that she'd been planning on making this series and her original Has Been Hotel series for years before she actually put out a pilot. So yeah, I think that the way these pilots are being put out on YouTube today is pretty fantastic. But still, that doesn't answer the question of just how good does your pilot need to be today when you're releasing it on YouTube? And really, I think that the answer for that question is going to vary. It's going to vary on the sort of story that you're putting into production, as well as the audience that you're aiming for. Different audiences, different productions, they're all going to bring in a sort of expectation that's going to differ from one another. And so really, when thinking about this, I'd have to say that the answer really depends on just who you're aiming for as your main audience and what sort of production you're going to try and pursue. And really, when it comes to this sort of idea, I think that the pilot for The Amazing Digital Circus is a great example of what I mean. The pilot for this series is pretty fantastically put together. Of course, the creator Gooseworks knows what sort of production they're going into and what sort of audience they're aiming for. And again, like Vivian Medrano before her, Gooseworks also knows a lot of what her character ideas and world ideas are going to be established and built around. And all of this builds towards a successful pilot and then eventually a successful series. And no, right now I'm going to stop and say that a good animated pilot does not need to be as good as the pilot for The Amazing Digital Circus. This is just my brief little example of what I mean. Instead, a good animated pilot has to be as good as the creator thinks it needs to be. Because of course, the creator knows what sort of audience they're aiming for and what sort of production they're aiming to put together. And that is what my answer has to be. An animated pilot isn't a 100% complete production, but it's also not the first draft of a story. Instead, it's a creator or a team of creators laying a foundation for the story that they're going to build off of it. The creators know what story they're going to tell and who they want to tell it to. And so of course, an animated pilot only needs to be as good as they think it needs to be. YouTube is a great home for animation, and I'm sure that's going to continue in the future. Anyway, thank you all for watching, everybody. Please be sure to let me know how good you think an animated pilot actually needs to be in the comments section down below. Also, if you want to hear me ramble about more animation stuff, more animation community stuff, or more animated news, please be sure to subscribe. Anyway, thank you all for watching, everybody. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.